When I was a university student a long, long time ago, there was a student prank that became popular in our sort of school year. The idea of it was somebody, not me. I will deny all knowledge if questioned. Definitely not me, but somebody would sneak into a local garden and steal one of their garden gnomes. Often this would be just before summer break, and the gnome would get taken on vacation and to various trips during the summer and have photographs taken of it in many unusual and exotic places. And when classes resumed in the fall, we would put the garden gnome back in the garden that it came from, along with all the vacation snaps and maybe little notes um, saying what a good time he'd had on vacation, say on the beach or in the mountains, all of that. And we would have a giggle, and the owners would have no idea who borrowed their gnome, but they'd have all the holiday snaps as evidence that he'd enjoyed himself. Well, today's book has one small story quite similar to that, along with many, many more. So hi and welcome to the Running Book Reviews podcast, where we review books written for runners, about runners, and by runners to help you decide if you'd like to read the book for yourself. We also hope that listening to us chat about running can keep you motivated about your own running and maybe inspire you with your running or to try something new in your running. My name is Alan. With my co-host Liz, we're going to talk today with author Harvey Mitro about his book, Taking Life in Stride.
Taking Life in Stride is Harvey's memoir, but divided into short stories. The short stories are divided into themes, and each theme section has an introduction. Also kind of a little bit of a story. There are 6 themes. There's racing, moments, fun on the run, life's little difficulties, people, which was my favorite section, and family. The stories can be read independently, but some characters are featured in multiple stories throughout the book, like Harvey's first dog, Chachka. A little bit about Harvey. Harvey Mitro is a husband and father who lives in Toronto. With a degree in kinesiology, he has been working as a personal trainer and has guided exercise for people ranging from age 4 to age 101. Maybe he'll tell us a little bit about that experience. I want to be 101 and be hiring a personal trainer. He has been a runner for over 30 years, has broken 4 minutes for the mile, and has represented Canada internationally. His best performances were in the 80s and 90s when he had won some of the most competitive races in North America, like the Cherry Blossom Mile in the US. So with great pleasure, we introduce Harvey to the podcast.
Hi there.
So the first question, in your book, you mentioned that you were thinking of writing a book of short stories starting around 2010 or 2011. This is also related to the first question that we always ask. How did you finally decide to write this book?
Yes, I mean, it's a good question. And in some ways, it's a complicated question because at different points in the process, I think my answer will be different. But it begins with, I believe, a love of storytelling. I am a personal trainer, and if you can imagine my clients running on the treadmill, you then could imagine me telling them these little different stories so to help pass the time as they plod along on the treadmill. And further from that, these clients began saying, you should write a book about these stories. They enjoyed the stories. And so that put the idea in my head. And then from there, the evolution of the story writing came both from opportunity and the process of starting it up. So I think I envisioned a number of stories that could make the pages, but as I began moving through them, they evolved and the types of stories and the direction of the stories changed. So really, if I look at the origins, I have to then speak of 2 of my clients, David and Noreen. David is an Order of Canada award-winning literary person who he was given the order because of his contribution to Canadian literature on a number of levels. he's one of the founders of the Giller Prize, and Mrs. Taylor is the founder and driving force behind the Taylor Prize for literary nonfiction. So these two kind of giants in the literary world in Canada, who are my people running on the treadmill, if you can imagine.
Oh, wow.
And yeah,
That's
so
amazing.
when other people are telling me to write the story, I first approached David, who's an English professor at the University of Ottawa, and asked him if he'd help me because I'd never written before. And he said, sure. And sure enough, he followed the course with me all along. So from there, my writing evolved into what is the book that I've now completed. And so there's a lot more to that. I'm happy to tell you about it if it fits the question.
So was that pretty daunting then? Because they're big hitters in terms of literary, knowledgeable people. I think I would feel a bit like, going to Kipchoge and saying, "Oh, will you teach me how to run quick?" It's like it would be quite intimidating.
That's a
Did
great
you find
intuition.
it that way?
Yeah, that's a great intuition because, in fact, it is kind of like that. I'm a novice stepping into the arena of masters. And yeah, my first, so I laugh because my first draft was about a 20-page story. And I handed it to David and he marked it up and did the English corrections. But he handed back to me and said, this is beneath you. Take out 8 pages. And I was mortified because,
Wow.
yeah, like, what do you do with that? Right. So I take it back. And of course, I thought I had given him something that was really fantastic.
Sure.
And he just, it basically deflated.
So he puts a D minus on it and gives
exactly.
it back to you.
I got the X, right? And so I started the process. I went home and started rewriting. And through those moments it felt perhaps demoralizing. I recognized that, wait a minute, like I've been along a course of a pursuit of something that mimics my own version of excellence in the running realm. And why would I expect anything less from being a writer? Like, why would I be a great writer off the start without having to do any work? So I started through the process of eliminating pages and would, talk to David as I went along. And then he would say, yeah, that's right. You've got to take things out. You take the reader left and right, and you're taking them all over the place. And you've got to take them on a linear journey. That you have to respect that this isn't a self-indulgent process. You have to provide a story that the reader can follow and has like a good narrative arc. So I began to understand that first story, I had 8 separate drafts, and he was kind enough to edit all 8.
Oh, wow.
As it began to take shape. Now, as I wrote further and further, I got better at it, and it took less drafts to come up with what was finally making the book. And the other thing he insisted on was that I was sending out, when a draft was ready, I had to send it out to magazines and different publications to get them to publish it. So publish some of my separate works to validate that the writing was good, that it wasn't just us that thought so, that other experience in the market, in the
like
field.
a peer review almost.
Exactly. So that's where the stories began, and they evolved from there. Yeah.
So if people are reading the book, then now they know that they're reading a peer-reviewed article from somebody who's trained from a beginner to an expert.
I mean, did you take some of the same stories that you had maybe entered into magazines and put them in the book? Or did you just use that as like, okay, so they like this kind of thing, so maybe this other story will go in the book? Like, did you use separate stories for the 2 projects?
Again, great question. I had 6 stories that I sent out, 6 of my earlier stories that I had written. And when David gave them the okay, I would send them out. And he said, I want to see 4 stories published before you think about completing it as a book and approaching publishers about this book. So that's what I did. And 4 of those 6 got published. So I was really proud of that. And that took place over like 3 years. This didn't happen suddenly. It was sort of an ongoing thing. But what I found was, I feel, if I'm being completely honest, I don't think my best 8 pieces were ever sent out. Like, I really felt that my best writing came later, because as David would always tell me, that a story needs a reason to be told. There has to be a why to a story. If you want it to be compelling to the reading audience, there has to be a why. And I felt that as time went on, I understood more about the whys, and I got stronger at expressing that within the weaving of the individual stories.
It sounds a lot like training, if we want to relate it to running, because, your training has to always have a why. And also, even just like your reason for pursuing goals in running has to have a why. So sounds like it very much was the same as running in that way.
Oh, there's so many parallels, Liz. There really is. Like, good workouts versus good days writing. Self-doubt when you're out there and have a rough day, and sometimes I'll read a story and I'm like, oh, that's crap, like, and it just bothers you until you can make it right. There's so many parallels to running and writing, and I think that was really helpful for me, that I had the running experience to know that, okay, I feel badly today, but this might not be how I feel tomorrow. So, don't throw everything out just on how you're feeling on the day. You need to be in there for the long haul, right?
Yeah. So I guess we can start off by maybe talking about one of your stories, because one of the first stories in the book was about your experience leading a blind boy to a national record. And I guess what struck me about the story was that you talk about feeling really connected to that person after the race was finished. Like, you didn't know this person before, but after you finished that race, and it was only a 400 and 800-meter race, you felt like you had this special bond. Maybe can you describe that experience, and also some of the logistics just behind like leading a blind person in a race? Because I think, probably a lot of listeners are not familiar with that.
Yes. Well, this goes back to when I was in grade 11. So we're talking around 1980. So how things might be done now will probably be different in terms of guiding a blind runner. And really, if I look at exactly what played out, I'm sure it wouldn't play out that way today. But my experience was, I was at this event, which was a Special Olympics style event for track and field, and was there assisting another athlete who was doing the shot put, who was a close personal friend. And in this situation, it so happened my aunt was a volunteer to help run this event. And she then said, we need someone to help this blind runner. And she knew that I was an accomplished young runner, but I'm in grade 11. I've never guided a blind runner before, but I'm a strong runner. And so she introduced me, and they sent me out. And that's how it started. The two of us then got out and did some strides together. I had my arm just under his arm, and I went to the outside of the track, so it would have been my left arm holding his right upper arm. And I guided him through some strides, and we kind of got comfortable a little bit together, and there we were, thrown right into the race. But there's something about physical contact with another human being, and I'm a young person at this time, and I'm having to hold this person, and this person has to trust me. And we race. We this is an important race for him, and gosh, I'm invited right in, like, to experience it with him, and have physical contact with him the whole way, and go through the process, and in more than that, be his eyes. I instinctively started speaking to him, and sort of almost like commentating and coaching at the same time, encouraging, things like that. And none of this was scripted. It all just happened. But I felt it led to a connection that was like nothing as I had ever experienced before, and quite profound. And I tried to express that to the readers.
Yeah, and this guy's moving pretty quick because this is not jogging. This
No.
is 400-meter flashing around the track, basically. So he's putting a
Yeah.
lot of faith into some kid who he's never met before. I guess he's experienced at this point in putting his faith into people. I almost
Like,
said blind faith, no pun intended, but
no.
sort of.
I talk about it in the story as almost having another sense, not meaning sight, but that capacity to trust. That's what struck me, that like to trust in a way that I, as a young person, I couldn't trust another human being
Yeah.
without sight. And he ran his 400, I believe, in 58 seconds. So
Wow.
anyone who's
That's
run
fast.
at that speed knows, like, that is you're hauling.
Yeah.
You're out there
Mhm.
really
We can't do
flying.
that.
Yeah, I
Mm-mm.
mean, I can't do it anywhere close to that now. And I know that that's just so fast, and to run that fast with a grade 11 kid on your arm, it's really something.
How old was the competitor?
We were the same age. He may have been a year
Okay.
younger than he may be a year younger than I was. I believe he was in grade 10 and I was a year.
Wow.
I think the nice thing about reading that story was, and this occurred in several of the stories, probably some of the stories were designed this way, but you get a real emotional buzz out of it. It's not a huge story, but it has enough in it that you get the emotional sense of it a little bit towards the end, and you get this. And we'll come on to that for some of the other stories. I mean, some of the stories are just snapshots. Some of them are actual. They actually try to touch the essence of the human part, and I think that does. Some of the stories are pure slapstick as well. I think there's a whole gamut of different types of stories in there. But that one, I think, I certainly got an emotional reaction from finishing up that little story. And talking of other types of stories, I guess I should ask you, what prompted you to take a course in creative dance at university? we have this guy in university who's probably found himself in with all the graceful. I wouldn't say ungraceful. You're probably quite graceful at the time, but
No,
find his
ungraceful would
way
be
in with all the
fair.
graceful little ballerinas. And then there's Harvey, who's doing the same course in creative dancing. And not only that, but you had actually a practical exam where you had to
Yes,
put your own creative dance together.
yes.
What was that all about?
Well, as a aspiring runner through the late part of my high school years, I competed a lot away from class. And I think my marks suffered. I had to work really
Yeah.
hard as a student just to get by. I wasn't a natural student. And my marks coming out of high school, they weren't great. And I applied to all these schools. I was denied entry into all the courses I wanted to take. And I even had some of the coaches at the schools trying to help me get in. And I still wasn't getting in. And I was declined for kinesiology at Waterloo and was accepted. For some reason, they just accepted me into dance. They sent me this acceptance into dance.
But
that
you
I
didn't
still can't.
apply.
I didn't apply to dance, but no, you can't come into kinesiology, but if you want to go into dance, you can. And I'd never danced before. So, but my brother, who was also a student at the University of Waterloo, my older brother, Matt, he took a look at the core requirements and said, look, it's in the same faculty as kinesiology. In first year, you're taking all the same courses except for these 2 dance courses.
Kind of a human movement type of thing.
That's right. It was all in the same faculty. I'm in the same classroom with the kinesiology students for all the courses except for the 2 dance courses. And so if I had a couple of electives that I took these kinesiology courses that dance students don't take, and if I could get by, I could go straight into second year kinesiology, and I'm not even behind.
Okay.
So we said, okay, let's try to, like I said, okay, I'll try to backdoor it. And I met with my dance advisor and I explained what I wanted to do. And her face just dropped, like, really? like you
Really? You
show,
don't want to dance?
yeah, like you want to do this, and I was like, it's my only chance to go to university, and I really wanted to go, and so that's what I did. And yeah, the one story talks about my experience as a dance in this creative dance class where I'm the only guy in the class. I'm 6'4". I've never danced, and I've got to dance with dance majors, all female. Oh, it was a gong show. So the story then explains everything that ensues from there, and it does relate to my life of running. As the story unfolds, it explains how those two things end up connecting.
Mm-hmm. I think, like, since we're on the topic of university, maybe we should just like head right on to the beer mile. You have a story about the beer mile, and it really actually doesn't sound like a lot of fun at all. You're basically trying to keep down vomit the whole time while running, and then every lap you had to drink another beer. So I guess my first question is, did you ever do another one after that experience?
Sadly, we
Okay.
had a couple of years where we ran the beer mile,
Oh my
and we
goodness.
even did a beer naked mile. If you can imagine, it was on April 1st. It was like 0 degrees, and a bunch of bonehead university. There we are thinking, oh, here's a good idea. Anyway, it
I
was
guess
all
if
about
it was that cold, there probably wasn't too much to see.
exactly. And we did it in the dark, thank God.
Okay,
But
hold on. I just have a side comment to make, because I saw my friend that I hadn't seen in a while. I saw her last weekend, and I met her kids, and one of her kids is 13. And she was telling me all about TikTok, and she was telling me all about how every time somebody starts to even do something that looks like it might be ridiculous, someone takes out their phone to film them. And my first reaction was, thank God that didn't exist when I was in high school. And like, now that you're telling me this story, I'm like, thank God it didn't exist when you were in high school.
yeah. Well, let me tell you what did happen that day. And this isn't in the beer mile story, but someone did come out with a camera, and there were
Uh-oh.
some photographs that started snapping halfway through. Fortunately, they're grainy and it was dark, but there's a few of them that I'm hoping none of the participants become politicians, because if they come out, there definitely would be compromising. But they won't come out, and fortunately,
And camera technology wasn't really that good then. So if it was
absolutely.
dark,
But
it
Will
would.
all our listeners know what a beer mile is? Basically, you do one lap of the track, you drink a beer, you do one lap of the track, you drink another beer, so you repeat 4 times. So you end up drinking 4 beers in very, very quick succession and racing really rather hard
yes,
in between times. And really, the two things are not at all compatible.
not at
And
all. And there's
Mm-mm.
actually an official beer mile that's run now.
yeah, there's a world record. I think a Canadian may even hold the world
That's
record.
correct. And I'm kicking myself because I know him, and I'm trying to bring his name in. I'm hope we'll let it go, and it may pop into my head. But he's run the beer mile in 4 minutes, and I believe it's 4:28 his world
Yeah,
record
yeah.
for the mile. And it takes him about 5 or 6 seconds to drink each beer.
Yeah.
He's running the mile in like 4:01.
So you got to drink. You got to drink a beer in 7 seconds 4 times and run a 4-minute mile.
Right, and you're not allowed to throw up. You're not allowed to vomit, or you have to
Get
do an
DQ'd.
extra lap or something.
Yeah, you get disqualified basically.
Disqualified, yeah. Like
Yeah.
it's an incredible thing. But Corey Belmore, there it is, Corey Belmore.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, if your listeners want to look up Corey, there's some videos showing just what an incredible feat it is and how fast he's running. He's a 339 1500 meter runner, and boy,
Wow.
he does in the beer mile. I mean, I don't know who's going to break that record, but it is something.
Yeah, because if he can run 3:39, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
1500. Yeah. So he's really fast, and he can drink beer really fast. I think those two skills are not found in very many people at the same time.
I would agree with that. Certainly not found in me. as I learned running the beer mile.
But you did do it again.
I did it several times, and I will not. I know I will never do another one. As I comment in the story, I think I threw up and beer got into my eyes.
Oh no.
No, oh, and then as I say, Valentine's Day was over for me and the beer mile.
But beer has a habit of bringing people together sometimes. Liz doesn't understand this because she's not a beer drinker, but being a beer drinker, it's a social glue. Brings people together. But running also brings people together, and that's a segue to maybe your story with the Jamaican guy that you met standing in the queue at Tim Hortons. Tim Hortons is the Canadian
Starbucks
Canadian Starbucks, let's say. Yeah.
Not really, but kind of. The Canadian Dunkin' Donuts.
And you're able, just standing in the line and just seeing this Jamaican guy, you're able to make a connection through running.
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe you could tell us quickly a little bit about it.
Yeah, this was a wonderful experience, and this is it hinges around Usain Bolt, and many of your listeners will remember when Usain broke onto the scene internationally with his Olympic and world record. It was a 9.69 clocking or something. I might be wrong about the time off the top of my head, but he had just set that world record, and it was the next day, and I was in a gas station, and I saw a young man wearing a Jamaican soccer jersey, and I recognized it as the Jamaican soccer jersey. He was a young black man, and I was a couple of positions behind him in line, and I got to talk to this guy about Usain Bolt, because I was just busting, because it was the greatest feat of human athleticism to date that I had ever seen. It was just, he was otherworldly what he achieved, and I was just had to talk to this young man. Well, he kind of, first, like, why is this guy coming up to me and talking? I don't know him. In the gas station, I tap him on the shoulder. When someone looks at you and there's a look of like, what the heck, but I said, look, I just saw your jersey. I have to talk to you about, did you see this race? And soon as I said that, everything changed. All of a sudden, the face changed. He dropped, he smiled. It was like, oh my God. And then he starts regaling about what the people were doing back home in Jamaica, celebrating in the streets. And he had just been talking to someone. We have this beautiful animated conversation, two people connecting over the love of sport and human achievement. And, otherwise we would have had no reason to connect. And anyhow, we go through the lineup at Tim Hortons, and I'm waiting for my ice cap because he's finished and gone. And all of a sudden I get a tap on the shoulder, and there's the same man, and he hands me a brand new, still in the foil, Jamaican team jersey. This is identical to the one he was wearing. And he said, I just want you to have this, and like, melt your heart, like, wow. I went, wow. Like, I was so happy that I reached out and sort of broke through my inhibitions, just because I wanted to talk to him about something positive. And wow. And then all of a sudden I have this connection. I actually wrote into the Toronto Star, and it got published about just the encounter, not the story that's in the book. I really go deep into it, but I just sort of a really short piece for the Toronto Star about what it is to be a Torontonian and be in a multicultural society and be able to connect through sport and kind of the bigger virtues of sport and the Olympic movement. And it was a wonderful experience.
Did you ever see him again?
I never saw him again. I was kind of because it kind of happens so fast, and then it's.
I know.
I kind of hope that when I wrote into the Toronto Star and my name was there, that maybe he'd see it and maybe we connect again, but that didn't happen. But it didn't diminish the moment, and I still have that jersey, and I still cherish it.
And I can see you actually lighting up as we're talking here.
Oh yeah.
Just talking about it, I can see you just sparking.
Yeah.
Just
wonderful.
thinking of reliving it.
You had also a few other opportunities to wear it, because Usain Bolt, he announced retirement and then he came back, and each time like he just dominates. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, he was a spectacular ambassador for track and field just by his amazing human achievements. And I said to the young man at the time, I didn't think we'd see someone in our lifetime better what Usain Bolt has done. And I still, obviously technology's changing. I could be wrong, and why wouldn't there be another phenomenon like that? But he was just so far beyond anything I had ever seen. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. I mean, there is now, because now there's also technology in the shoes, and it's
Yes.
extending to the track world. So, I mean, you never know, right?
Yeah.
The track itself hasn't changed all that much, but now the footwear is changing, so that could bring on some more good performances.
Yes.
I guess talking about bonding and bonding through sport, it seems like you also found a different way to bond with people you didn't know. It was the story about you stealing a little garden rabbit from somebody's garden. Well, when I first started reading that story, it was funny. I figured like, oh, you know, because you described sneaking after dark to somebody's house, and I thought like, oh, it's probably a prank on one of his friends. But you didn't know these people. You just stole their rabbit, and you brought it with you all over the world. And it's funny because it seems like you were able to connect with people, and people actually wanted to have their picture taken with this rabbit. Yeah, I guess like when I was talking to Alan during our run after I had read this story, I thought like it was kind of a great story. It was really fun, but I'm like, where would somebody get the idea to do something like that? And Alan told me that it was a prank that they used to play as kids in the UK. And so I guess, was this something like, how did you get this idea? Where did that come from?
I was interested in what you said there, Alan, because you talk about the garden gnome and people stealing them. And so when would this have happened? What year would you have been?
This is in the late 70s, early 80s.
Okay, because this is going to be
Similar
right
sort of
around.
time, probably.
No, I would have done it later. I would have done it in the late 80s.
Yeah.
It would have been 1990 that I did it. But I had never heard of the stealing of the gnome. So the way it happened with me is I had picked up some lawn ornaments in Mexico and brought them home for my mother to put in her garden. And she put it in her garden, and she added a bunch of others. And then my brothers and I kind of started rearranging them in these comic ways week after week. And then someone stole one of ours, someone that I worked with, and held it for ransom. So they stole one of these ones that my mother had out on the front lawn. And we had kind of a busy road in front of her place, or my parents' place at that time. And so this is where I got the idea. I had made the Canadian team. I was going to be traveling to a number of different countries. So I thought, I'm going to go and steal somebody's lawn ornament. I didn't know I didn't know what the lawn ornament would be, but out I went one night just in search of a lawn ornament. And I took it and I had it for the better part of 4 months, taking it all around the world. I think we went to 7 different countries and all these different locations, and taking photos as you described with the garden gnome. And then I wrote a story on the back of the photos as if the rabbit had got up on its own and traveled around the world. And then I put it in the baggie and left it on the doorstep of the people that I had stole it from, and ran away into the night again, never intending anything more to come of it. And more did come of it, but that's the other part of the story.
Oh, that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, you weren't able to stay anonymous.
I was not. And until I heard what you said, Alan, I thought that what I did preceded the garden gnome thing, because Travelocity, they do the garden gnome.
There you go. That's why they have a garden gnome on there.
Right. And So I thought what I did preceded all that, but it now learning from you, it didn't. This was happening even earlier when you were a young guy. And
Yeah, that would have been
yeah,
in the UK. So maybe
yeah,
you
in the UK.
traveled
Yeah.
at different
Hmm. It seems like
places at different times.
it seems like teens are teens everywhere in the world, and so they come up with the same kind of crazy ideas.
Right, right. There you go.
Because
Crazy.
there wasn't social media back then, so you didn't learn it from social media.
Did not, no.
So we saw your current dog just before we started in the background, Twyla, who looks exactly like the dog that features several times in your book and in several stories, who's called they're sort of a whippet type of dog who's called Chachka. Rather than prompt you, maybe you could just tell us, where does Chachka come from as a name? It's quite unusual, and tell us something about Chachka.
Okay. Well, as you say, Chachka factors all throughout the book, and I've tried to use Chachka in the book, the stories about Chachka, kind of as these light little stories. My mother was teasing me as I was testing out the story. She said, "Like, God, are you always so serious?" And some of the deeper stories, she'd razz me like, "God, can you lighten up?" But all along, I wanted to tell the story of Chachka, but instead of telling his story in one long story, I've kind of divided it up into these little episodes. And Chachka came to us from the Humane Society. We were looking for a dog, and went there and went back into an area that we shouldn't have gone back into. It was actually a restricted area because he was waiting to be reclaimed by whoever may have lost him. So there's a time period that goes by. So we went back there, and this little hound was tucked away, and he saw us in, and he came to his cage and he stuck his paw out. And here was this little skinny running dog, and my wife Nicole, and I, both skinny running people, saw this little hound and fell in love with him. And so we put in for him that when the period passed, could we have a chance to adopt him? And we were so fortunate to have him. And he was such a character. He did so many things to embarrass us, and so many things that were funny and fun. So writing about him was a real pleasure, and a real pleasure bringing those memories and stories to life for other people to read.
I actually put in my question for this that in the book he's not always the most perfectly well-behaved of dogs, and I suspect that this made you love him even more.
Absolutely. We weren't the best owners either.
Yeah.
Like, when you think of it, like, we kind of have this
Yeah,
motto to leave him off his lead when we ran with him. We try to let, like, whippets need to run, like whippets and greyhound, they need to run, and they love to run fast, and it's a beautiful thing when you see it when they run. So when when you don't have a dog fully under control, you are rolling the dice for some things to happen, and we paid the price on that a few times, but not in any drastic way. And he certainly was not a dog that would harm anyone or anything, but he got into some mischief for sure.
So I guess we can go back to some of the serious stuff. Because you do have a story about how you were diagnosed with ulcerative colitis in 1988. So, being a runner and having this disease, I mean, did it change anything for your running? Was it, maybe better once you had the diagnosis because at least you knew what to expect, or was there anything that you started doing differently to manage flare-ups or avoid them, just in case there are other runners with the same problem?
Yes, I mean, I think there we have much better treatments for it now. So the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation have really been fantastic in evolving the research and some of the treatments. I'm on a treatment now that I feel had I had as a young person would have completely eradicated my ulcerative colitis. Those treatments weren't available back at the time when I was going through it. So to answer your question, it really was, I was seeking medical attention. It was largely not 100% effective in helping me avoid some of the pitfalls of the disease. So I had to just cope with it as best I could. I think what's wonderful about the disease now is that people are talking about it. Now, that was a story I wasn't going to write. That was never on the queue. And then other people began bravely writing about themselves. One person in particular, Alex Treasure, put an article in the Toronto Star, and she was a Canadian national team member in the high jump. And I thought to myself, it's time to write about it. And I tried to keep a sense of humor about that issue. I wrote, I mean, the predicaments as a distance runner who doesn't have control of their bowels because of this punishing disease, the predicaments that one finds themselves in are quite harrowing. And if you remove some of the shame that one might feel around such predicaments, they're actually kind of funny. There's some that are kind of funny, and I try to present them with humor, but also touch on the path of accepting the feelings of shame around having an issue, a gastrointestinal issue that takes away your control, without having to abandon my love of the sport altogether, which would have been another option that I never really entertained.
I guess there are two aspects to it. Is like, you feel that because you're an athlete, like you should be healthy, and to have a diagnosis can sometimes feel like, I don't know if shame is really the right word, but just I don't know, like just feels like it shouldn't belong to you.
Unfair.
Yeah, like unfair, because here you are like doing everything right, quote unquote, and life gives you that. And you didn't just have this issue, you also had a little bit of a heart issue as well.
Yes, I do.
And where I guess, yeah, you still probably do have it. And like, how did that affect I mean, you were still a really good runner, like you ran sub 4-minute miles and you represented Canada, but I guess it did affect some of your races.
Yeah, you know, I do talk about it a little bit in the book in different places, but I try not to put too much emphasis on it, but I do tag it in a few places because I think it was part of the challenges of my running career. So it does factor into some stories. But the more I think about that, I think of almost every runner I know. And you could look at the challenges and regrets or lost opportunities that present from those challenges. And it brings me to one of the commonalities I feel like with every level of runner. You know, you're going to have challenges that you either meet or fall short of in your estimation for whatever reasons that you have in your life, right? And those challenges are part of our humanity, and I've really come to feel myself, for my own part, that the true value of a life of running comes from that. All of the experiences, these wonderful triumphs, but they're tempered with these really difficult things too. And how do we relate to a cross section of humanity if we don't have them both, right? And if we can't really look at the journey as something that's wonderful despite the challenges, and that we can share the challenges. I like to talk about Doug Consiglio. He's a great example. Then I'll just quickly tag on his aspects of his story as I saw it. Doug, Canadian record holder, 1,500 meter mile indoors, 1,500 meter outdoors. 1988 comes around. He finishes 1 second behind Peter Rono in the Harry Jerome Classic, and he runs 3 minutes and 35 seconds for 1,500. So it's about a 3:52 mile. He shatters Canadian record by 2 seconds. One of the most beautiful pieces of running. I was there that day watching, and one of the most beautiful pieces of running I've ever seen. And you're looking at a guy at the pinnacle of racing. And I'll throw Philbert Baye in there because he didn't get his chance at the Olympics. Another example. Yep. But Doug then later that summer got Epstein's Barr virus. And so by the time the Olympics rolled around, it basically sapped him of his capacity to race altogether. He went there, didn't make it out of the heats, like wasn't himself at all. I don't know that it ever allowed him to get back to the trajectory that he was on, because this guy was going to be one of the best in the world, and he was not going to be. He was one of the best. Rona went on to win the Olympics, and just to give an example of. But if I look at Doug's career and all the things to celebrate and everything he's done for the sport in Canada, I think, okay, there's an example, another example of a person who, yeah, he took some hard hits, but boy, what he did sure was spectacular. I know he would be one who could really relate to the struggles and the victories, you know. And I think if we embrace both sides of that, I think then running will be all that much more applicable to people at every level that take part in the journey.
I guess it just means that, you know, we all have challenges. Sometimes you get to see people run at their best before they hit their challenges, and other times, like, you know, you'll never know how far you could have gotten because maybe you had those challenges earlier.
I mean, distilled simply from our perspective, you know, because we didn't explain it to you at the start of the podcast and in our intro, but we've been trying to do like a sub 3 hour marathon, and Liz has never done one, and that's kind of a target. But our approach is, okay, we set ourselves into a training process and we learn to enjoy the process and all of the value that comes from that, and all of the learning and all of the lessons and all of the funny stories, and basically enjoy that for what it is and where we're able to go. And if we achieve the thing, whatever it is, you know, for you, it might be a sub 4 minute mile, Harvey, or it might be qualifying for the Olympics. One you manage to do, one you don't quite manage to do, maybe. For Liz, it's a 3 hour marathon, but we kind of view that as the cherry on the cake. So the idea is to love the process and mine the process for as much value as you can get out of it, and then accept the other things as they come.
Yeah, and I think that's the true nature of our sport for anyone who takes part. That you can celebrate so much, like having goals, like you talk about 3 hours. You have a goal, you're working towards that goal, but the wonder is everything around it. And if you achieve the goal, it's going to be part of the wonder. If you don't achieve the goal, then having put your best foot forward and done everything you can, all those treasurable nuggets are going to be interwoven into the pursuit, just as you're describing.
So I guess we can rewind a little bit. I mean, not in terms of the book. We're fast forwarding in the book, but rewinding in the story of your life. My favorite section, as I mentioned, it was the people section, because I just find it's amazing how people can have an effect on the direction of your life. And you seem to have some very special running influences pretty early on in terms of coaches. You had a high school coach, Coach Browner, and
Yes.
then your University of Western coach, who just sounded like such an amazing man, Don Mills, who
Yes.
he just dedicated his life to coaching and you know, volunteering at meets, and he just sounded like just a great person. Do you think that these two people were the reason that you ended up being a lifelong runner?
I mean, I could name, I think probably 6 or 7 individual coaches who were had extremely powerful influences. It's interesting that you mentioned Don Mills, because just last night after Don passed away, last night was reading all the tributes that happened. Don was a gift to the running community. He coached so many at so many levels, and whether you were a beginner or you were an international athlete, he gave you his heart and soul, and his whole life was dedicated to running. So he was a real gift to the community, and I benefited from that. But he coached me at the University of Waterloo, but he was never my lifetime coach. I had 2 coaches, one named Vito Dalben, who came during and after high school, and another coach named Paul Post here in Toronto. And those two coaches, I'm so indebted to. Vito took me from a skinny high school kid, and with the help of Coach Brown in high school, they developed me into a national and international level runner through hours and hours of volunteer time and expertise. I wrote a full story about Coach Brown because he was this omnipresent person in the community, the high school community that I came through. He's a huge personality and a really interesting story. At the same time, Vito Dalben, he was a much more private man, and I said, I'd like to write a story about Vito, but I'd have to write a book. I would have to write a book about Vito because the level of commitment and the nuances and the amount that he gave to my life, he's like my brother. You know, he's like a brother to me in my heart. And he had that kind of influence. And then when I moved to Toronto to be with my wife, Paul Post from the Toronto Olympic Club, who's a legend. Paul's a legend. He's coached, I think he's probably coached a dozen or more sub 4 minute milers and developed all kinds and was he's in his mid 90s now. He's still going strong.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yep. But Paul, he's in the Hall of Fame for road running and for coaching. Anyway, he's a legend among Canadians. But Paul handled my career here in Toronto and was a wonderful guide. I also I feel about coaches like all the way from Pee Wee baseball and hockey and all those coaches. They're little angels that gave of themselves because they wanted to, and here I was, just this little person coming along that could take advantage of it. I mean, how grateful I am to all of them. But certainly Don Mills, Paul Post, Vito Dalben, and Coach Brown are among the top of the list for me.
And something that I didn't know is that you're actually a member of a Canadian team that set a running world record in 1998. And if I read rightly in your book, that world record set in 1998 still stands today.
It does. It does still
So
stand.
that's some world record.
Mm-hmm.
For the 100-mile relay. So that's
Correct.
100 people who run 1 mile each.
Correct. Yes. So we had 100 people, each run 1 mile each in a continuous relay. So it was a 100-mile relay, and we brought together some of the best in Canadian distance running of all time and of the time. And this was set just leading in. It was 1998, I believe. We set that record. And it still stands. We broke the existing world record by a full 15 minutes. And then a year later, we did an all women's world record.
Oh,
and
wow.
Existing world record by 15 minutes. And both of those records still stand. I know an American team attempted a couple of years ago and they missed by 8 minutes. But it's just testament to what a great group of runners we brought together on that day.
So you had 100 people who are pretty darn fast. Every single one of them is pretty darn fast, I would imagine. Did you place like a qualifying time on the membership?
No, I just basically, it was early in the days of email. So I basically just built this team. But what I did was I reached out. I mentioned Doug Consiglio earlier. Well, Doug was pivotal because I reached out to Doug first and asked him, and Doug being the Canadian record holder out at the time, or not at the time, it had just been broken in the previous couple of years by Kevin Sullivan and Graham Hood, who are still the 2 fastest Canadians ever. And I reached out to Doug and I said, will you come in? And then when Doug came in and he brought in another Canadian record holder, the one that he broke Dave Reed's Canadian record, he brought Dave in. Then I have 2 Canadian record holders. I'm a sub 4 minute miler. It's my community. So I'm reaching out to all of my competitors, but who are my friends. I'm reaching out to all of these people in this community, and we begin to pull together this core group of really storied runners. And then everybody came running. I landed Kevin Sullivan. Well, when Kevin said yes, and he was not the Canadian record holder at that time, but he was a a massive force in Canadian distance running at that time. When he landed, then the people started coming to me, and then I started like labeling them. Like once I promise someone a position, I'm not going to take it away. And I have to say, I had regrets on some of the people I couldn't include on the team who really deserved a spot, but when I promised someone a spot, I wouldn't take it away. And everybody deserved, that was on the team, deserved to be on. But of course, there were some other people that came to the table a bit later, and we had the team built by that time, and we had to leave it the way it is. But just out of interest, the last 5 runners were the 5 Canadian record holders in order. Were the last 5 runners of the relay, and so it became a real celebration of our history as a distance running group of people in Canada, middle distance running.
It also says something about the depth of like that race distance at the time. I mean, that you had all those people kind of in the same generation or approximately that could run those fast miles. I mean, you had 100 of them and you weren't even including everyone.
Yes, yeah, very fortunate. Again, it speaks to the community. And I know in the book, I don't just tell the story of the relay. I try to paint a picture of what this community looks like, at least this segment of the community. This would be the track and field, high level elite running community, the high level elite men's running community. But I try to paint a picture of it as a community. I tell the life stories of different people within it, and I try and weave it into the story to paint a picture. But of course, you know, there's an equal story on the women's side, and then there will be an equal story on the road racing side. But this one is a little snapshot of kind of what that community looks like.
Well, something I was not aware of at all and never heard of and didn't even know existed. So I found it absolutely fascinating to read that one.
Oh, thanks, Alan. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, it's, you know, you think of your top 10 things in your life that day.
Yeah.
That was a top 10er.
The racing stories and the insights of the person who's racing while they're racing and how they feel and what they see around them while the race is going on. I always find that fascinating, and I always find it super motivating as a runner to read about that. And I was super interested in your story about the Cherry Festival, the Cherry Blossom Mile in the US, where you met on a preceding race. You met this American guy, Dennis, who was running his local mile, and you were running with him, and you ended up being the 2 front runners. And I thought it was fascinating the way that you assessed him, because you're running extremely fast in this mile right at the front, and this guy suddenly sees you next to him and you see him, and you're able to talk us through what you see in the guy in terms of how surprised is he to see you? Is he expecting to win? What's he wearing? Does he have a sponsor? He's moving ahead. He's looking authoritative. He's looking relaxed. He's clearly expecting to win, and he's got the pedigree to do that. And you're sort of weighing him up at the same time as a competitor. And I think that was kind of quite a fascinating insight. I think somebody who obviously is an expert at their craft, that's you at the mile, and how that played out, and then went on to the Cherry Mile, where the Cherry Blossom Festival or whatever it was called.
Cherry Festival Mile, correct? Yeah.
Where I think you ran one of your best ever.
That's right. I ran my fastest ever mile there on that day, and I do talk about it in that story. And it was my first time running the mile faster than 4 minutes, so it was very special. But the race you described was the race that cued me to enter the race where I broke 4 minutes for the mile. And I think if it's okay, I'd love to tell you a little bit about the evolution of that story, the writing process, because
great.
I think your listeners might find it fascinating, because I feel it's a kind of a fascinating story. So everything that I described, so this is a race. I'm a Canadian boy living pretty close to the border, and I go to Detroit to race in a 1 mile road race. And I find myself alone at the 3/4 mile mark with this other very fine runner. And I assess that runner on a lot of cues, like you were talking about. how fast he was able to run, how fast he changed his pace, how authoritatively he went to the front. He was sponsored. He was wearing a Domino's Pizza jersey. You don't get sponsored unless you're a very good runner. And I knew that he would be surprised to see anyone with him at that stage in the race because he was that good. So I assess what's going on. I actually end up winning that race on the sprint over this man who holds the course record for that race, which was a couple seconds faster than we ran on that day. And I come to know him, and then he tells me about the Cherry Festival Mile. But in the writing of that story, I had written a version of that story that was quite almost exactly what you read in the book, and I had submitted it for a critique to a famous and accomplished Canadian author who's also was also a fine runner in his youth, a man named Lawrence Hill. Now, Lawrence Hill wrote a best-selling book called The Book of Negroes, and he's considered one of the great authors. And fortuitously, my life landed me at lunch with Lawrence Hill through a convoluted bunch of connections, and we started talking organically around the table, and it came out that I was writing the story. And he said, "Send me some of your work. Let me critique it." So I sent him that piece. Now, you who've read all of my work, I've sent him a piece about the pinnacle of my racing career. And that's the only piece he got. And he wrote back and he said, "Oh, it's good, this and that." It's a little bit, it reeks a little bit of like
self-aggrandizement.
Exactly, self-aggrandizement, exactly those words,
Yeah.
right? And he said, I wanted to know about this, and I wanted to know about that, and what motivates you. And so after my feelings stopped being a little bit hurt, as with any criticism I ever got, I said, okay, I've got to trust what this man is saying. Like he's a master. So what's he asking me for? And I reevaluated the story. I spent more time on the character of Dennis, because I talked about what it feels like as an athlete to be uncertain, to get beat when you weren't expecting to get beat. And I imposed some of my thoughts into Dennis's character and rewrote that whole section about what it feels like to have kind of like you're building, you're running like the building of a house, and you're putting those bricks in place and creating this foundation and creating the confidence, and all of a sudden something comes along and kicks some out. And what's that like when your whole life is dedicated to that pursuit? And I really explored that because Lawrence had asked me as a writer to bring more of the humanity into the process of the writing of that story, and so it really I added it, and I'm like, oh, that made the story better, and it just, I wanted to tell your listeners about it just as part of the process of writing a story and rewriting it and taking criticism and allowing a story to evolve and really trying to give the reader more. That was a really great example of how I got guidance from one of the very best.
I liked the little part about the lady that let you put your stuff on the front porch, like when you were at the Cherry Festival Mile.
Yeah,
it was
very
just
cool.
this lady with this nice looking porch, and you were just sitting outside, I guess, before most of the competitors got there. But I guess you were going to warm up, and she offered you all kinds of things. Like, you want to use the bathroom, and she didn't know you, and she was just like seemed very generous, and you ended up just using her porch to put your stuff on. But it seems like she really kind of took a liking to you. She found out you were from Canada, and and then when you won the race, it just seemed like it was almost like a little bit of a victory for her. She was so high. She seemed like she was so happy.
Absolutely. It was okay. So this person owned a home out by the start line of the race. So you make your way over to the start line, and she owned the home that was adjacent to the start line of this road race. And in my story, I reference her as kind of like a mother energy, because it was this welcoming, nurturing energy. And the Miles story is the only story I talk about my mother and my father. I wrote that story when my father, sorry, I get a little emotional talking about this. I wrote that story when my father was dying. I was just happened to be the time when I was writing that story. And I in no other stories had I talked about mom and dad. And in the Miles story, I weave in my relationship with my parents and how they're active in procuring what happens to me in the world and facilitating my life as a human being, obviously, but as a runner, but also my characteristics as a person. And I really try to weave that in there. And so having her, you know, obviously she's a real person that happened in the event, but having her as a mother energy that I could introduce and also bring. My parents couldn't be there. I'm hopping in my mom's car and driving 5 hours to this race. I don't know anybody, but she was also a wonderful vehicle to bring my sentiments about my parents with me on the day, because she was this mothering energy. And so I was really happy to have her incorporated in the story that way. One, because that's what she was, but two, because she could also then draw my own parents into the narrative at the moment. And some of the, like, anytime I read that piece out loud, I get really choked up talking about her and her role, and then how my parents come into that. Yeah, it's really personal, really personal for me.
I think you just demonstrated how authentic your stories are. Yeah, they clearly affect you still now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you want to resonate with human beings, you need to put yourself in there. You know, you need to, sometimes in a vulnerable way. And I hope I've done that in my stories to help people relate to them as human beings, because they're not just running stories. They're stories of a human perspective, I think.
Yeah. So I guess this is a good place to insert my question. In the last section about family, you actually explained in the sort of intro section that you wanted to write about the people that your children have become, but you decided against it because you thought that they should write their own stories. How did you make that decision?
Yeah, I pondered over it for a long time, and I came up with ideas, and you begin to craft different stories about your children and how they relate to, you know, how running kind of connects some of the things, because that is the central theme of the book. But I stopped myself because I felt that the power of my relationship to the children and my opinions about the different things that happen to them in their world are too important for me to take a stab at writing. And I wanted to just simply say that like, after really thinking about it, I felt that for me to venture down this road was too risky, because, you know, the way I feel about my children, or what I might think about them, and to put that down on paper and put it out publicly, I feel like maybe that was sacred ground, that that they just need to know that I love them with, excuse me, with everything I have as their father, and that's just where we're going to leave it. That I need to respect that. I just need to respect that, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that's where I left it. And I think that's kind of what I say in that introduction.
Yeah, at the end of the day, they need to write their own stories with their own lives.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and that's the way it should be.
Even though I suspect you could write some very emotional little stories if you did that, but you know, there's more to life than writing a book.
That's right.
Did you compile all the stories and say, oh, I've got this big jumble of stories and I need to decide which ones I'm going to put in the book and which ones I'm not, and how do I organize them? Or did you start with the chapters that we talked about at the start and then slot the stories in there? How did you sort of decide on the chapter themes
Okay,
and which
wow.
stories to have and not?
Thank goodness. Thank you for that question. Wow, I'm so happy to be able to state this. I talk about David and Noreen, right? And Noreen's the one who organized the Charles Taylor Prize for Literary Nonfiction. Well, I had originally, the original draft of the book had all the stories all in a row with no sections. And Noreen, I asked Noreen, who ran this book prize, to review it, the book as it stood ready to go. And she did, and she said, look, the writing, she said, I feel the writing is on par with the finalists that make the Taylor Prize. She really felt that the writing was really good of these individual stories, and she felt really strongly about it. She said, but as a reader, kind of felt like I got lost, because it's one story after another, and they just continue on. So she said, what about having sections where you pool the stories and giving that some thought to give the reader a little more structure. So I thought about that, and I started sort of dividing the stories. I came up with all these possible sections, and then started putting the stories in. Well, what could that be? Oh, how can I put that in this section? Of course, the Chachka stories, they don't necessarily belong in this section, but I thought, okay, I'm just going to parcel them out across the sections. But the other stories, I finally came up with the sections that Liz described, that I could kind of piece all those stories into. And then I thought, well, I know why they're going to go into those sections, but the reader's not going to know. So, why don't I tell a story that sort of describes why it's a section? And then I got like 6 extra little bonus stories in there. And when that was done, I felt so good about the change. I thought so much better. And I'm so happy I even had these 6 extra little stories. They're really short, most of them. But they introduced the sections, and I really feel that, wow, what a dramatic effect Noreen's advice had on the final book.
Do you have any stories that are your particular favorites? Any that are
that's a hard question.
Endearing towards you?
I mean,
they're all your. I'm giving you selfish choice here. I mean, they're all your children, and I'm asking you to choose between your children.
Right. I mean, they're all, when I hear them, they're all special. But there's certain stories like the Running Blind story is very special to me. I feel that it was the first one that got published, and some of the feedback I got from that story really buoyed me, and I really felt like there was a lot of my values that I stated in that story that were important. As I described, the 1 Mile story is very special, not only because it describes this pinnacle, but mostly because I spoke of Mom and Dad. I got to do a reading in Sarnia. Now, Dad's already passed, but I got to do a reading in Sarnia where I read the bit about my mother, and she's there with all her friends, and I'm reading about her. This is so special.
Did you hold it together?
I know I got choked up, and that's the way, that's me, and that's fine. But I got a little choked up. That's okay. But I held it together. No, I didn't fall off my chair or anything like that.
Did she hold it together too?
You know what? I think it was special for her. Yes, she held it together for sure. I don't know what was happening because she was in the audience and it was dark out there. But I think it was special for her, and I know it was special for me. And on that same reading, for example, I had Coach Brown there, and I had my coach Vito Dalben there, and I got to read, and I had, from the Running Blind story, the gentleman Dave Turnbull, that I went to the event as his support person. So he did the shot put. He was in the audience, and I got to read little pieces of each of their stories while they're in the audience with 100 other people.
That's pretty cool.
It was cool. Again, that was another top 10. It was so cool and so special. And and I think if nothing else, I remember after that reading, I said, if nothing else happens with this book, that opportunity would have made all that work worthwhile, because it was just so special. And I don't even, as I go along. You asked me the favorite stories. So those stories do hold, like, each story has a special place for different reasons. But if I had to pick a couple, certainly the Mile story because of having Mom and Dad in there, and certainly the Running Blind story because of some of what it carries as well. But they all do have they all do resonate in a special. And the Danny Cassip story, I don't
Yep.
need to
That's
mention.
what I've got
That's the
written.
one. That's the
Yeah.
one Alan chose.
That's what I've got written down.
Yeah, go ahead, Alan, and maybe
because
we can talk about that. Yeah.
because it's kind of unfair to ask you a question like that without having an opinion myself. So I'm going to ask you what your favorite story is, maybe, Liz. But I thought that the Danny Cassip story was sort of, it had pieces of everything. I found it fascinating. I found it informative. I found it uplifting. I found it moving, tinged with sadness. So, and all parceled up in running. So I found that to be almost a mini, like a novelette in itself, almost.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that a lot.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
mean, clearly you got it. That story does resonate with a lot of people, and sure does with me. Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, just the way that everybody came together, to help this guy. So, I mean, this poor guy was new to Canada without his family, and yeah, he found a family with running.
Yeah, on a bunch of levels, because he was such a fabulous runner. For those who don't know about Danny, he won the Toronto Marathon. He won the Montreal Marathon. He was one of Canada's great young marathon talents coming up. So he came here from I'm stuck on Uganda. It's not Uganda. It's war-torn Congo. The war-torn Congo landed him here in Canada after the Francophone Games in Ottawa. He defected, but he was here with no family. Had to leave his family home. Never saw his mom again. And he had to adopt a family here. And Danny's story is tragic because, and I don't know how much I should reveal or if I should just let people read it, because it is such a special story, but it's spiritual. It was a story that was spiritual. And boy, you talk about a series of events kind of guiding you on a path that's unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trusting the readers to come along on the journey on that story, but that for me, yeah, there's a vulnerability there, but gosh, how many people even were vulnerable, like his coach Ross, just in sharing the deep grief that he was going through because of what happened in that story. The number of people who were willing to be vulnerable along with me, and yeah, it was very special. But thanks, Alan, and thanks for Liz for getting it, because and for taking that ride.
Yeah, I think definitely. I guess I said it at the beginning. I have a favorite section. And I like the people section. That's where that story was, but also the Don Mills story. I mean, was just really good. I mean, so much dedication, and I mean, it wasn't, like I was reading through the story, and this guy was so dedicated to track and field, and then you find out that he actually had a full-time job.
Yeah.
So he had a full-time job that he was like juggling with, being this just very dedicated person, like just volunteering every bit of time and every bit of money he had to his athletes. And yeah, it's I mean, that one was the one that stood out to me, or at least one of them. I don't know if I could pick a favorite. So.
Yeah, that's wonderful that Don resonated with you like that, because you should have seen these tributes, and even his funeral. I've never seen anything like it. It was like a reunion of running from anyone who was in Ontario or close enough to make it. Like, there had to be 400 or 500 runners there, all talking, all with these great stories about this man who was a quirky, wondrous kind of guy, but just that pure dedication to others, a life of service, a life to others, and that was Don.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Maybe we could just ask you, because this book was published in partnership with Athletics Ontario. So is there like a preferred place that you want to direct listeners to buy a copy if they're interested in reading it?
Yes, absolutely. Definitely, if you Google me, it'll come up. But the site is Taking Life in Stride, which is the title of the book, takinglifeinstride.ca. And anyone can order the book from that site. if you want me to sign it, like my email is on the site as well. Just send me a note. I'd be happy to sign it for you. Also, I'm trying to think. It can be ordered also through the Athletics Ontario website, if you have any trouble finding it. And the proceeds from the book are being donated to Athletics Ontario. So it's something that I partnered with them in publishing the book, and I'm giving the donation, the proceeds of the book to them. And they've been a wonderful partner to be involved with.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, when I was growing up, I remember like in Ontario, just like Ontario was such a powerhouse. Like we would go race in Kingston because, like we live in Montreal. I grew up here, but we had a coach and he would bring us to a few races that were in Ontario. One of them was in Kingston. And I just remember those Ontario runners, like there were just so many of them that were so good, like such good runners. I was used to here, in Quebec, I do the Quebec provincials and I would be, on the podium, and I would go over there and I would just get crushed.
Well, I'm going to say right back at Quebec, because I went to one Ontario championship and I figured I was going to be the best guy there. Got out there and there's these 4 guys from Quebec came down. And I'll tell you, Pierre Levalle, Andrew McGuigan, Jean Lagarde, and Philippe Lehert. They came down and I came fifth. These guys
isn't Pierre Levalle the owner of Boutique
Endurance?
Yeah,
that's right.
There's a plug for Boutique Endurance.
Yep. Yeah. Well, Pierre, I mean, he was. I think he's the only man to ever to medal at nationals in the 1500, the 800, and the 400-meter hurdles. He was that good. And,
wow.
When I made my national team, he was on there with him, and we've been friends ever since. He's a real deal, real deal, great runner. But Philippe Lehert is sadly a person who died far too young, and he was the one who started the Endurance Boutique. And then some of his partners, Pierre, I think being one of them. I could be wrong about the exact evolution, but I know Philippe was at one point the one of Canada's greatest distance runners in the steeplechase and the 5,000 cross country. And he founded that store. And sadly was, I can't remember all the circumstances around how he passed, but very young. But these guys were real deal, man. Quebec, they were tough hombres, I'll tell you. I had some of my best races against the Quebec racers.
That's
okay,
fun.
Well, good to know.
Maybe that's for book 2.
There you go.
The rivalry.
And if people want to follow you and find out what you're up to, Harvey, are you on social media or?
Yes, under Harvey Mitro on Facebook is probably your best place to get me. By all means, send me a friend request. I'm going to say yes. And I'm on Instagram, but I'm a novice. And I still don't really know how to post well there. I love to post little clips. Every once in a while on Facebook, I'll do a little reading about the book. And I've got a few blurbs that I've posted. I did a few little promotional things. Can I mention one of them?
Sure.
I had David Bailey, Canada's first sub-4 minute miler. He's done a blurb on the inside cover of my book. And we lost David this past summer. And David was such a believer in this book, and he was helping me. He'd go on programs with me and help me promote the book. And I had one of his blurbs, and one of the little promotions I did on Facebook was a pictorial of some of David's amazing racing over the years. Great piece of history where David was part of it, and I would help you promote the book, which sends me to another thing. Have you guys come across Bruce Kidd's book?
Yes,
we've definitely heard about it.
We were actually on the podcast with Athletics Ontario. They invited us on as guests, and they were raving about Bruce Kidd's book on there. I think that's where the last time we.
Yeah, because then I think they also had him on one of the episodes as well.
That's right. He's been on a few podcasts, but the reason I bring up Bruce, having written a book as well that came out this year, Bruce was David's training partner, along with the Olympic silver medalist Bill Carruthers, and they were this core piece of history that wonderful that some books are coming out to preserve it, because I'm almost done Bruce's book now, and it's a great read as well. Another book for another day, I'm sure.
Yeah, we'll put it on the list.
Yes,
Definitely.
So the book, Taking Life in Stride by Harvey Mitro, I mean, you've heard quite a lot about it now, and I hope you're getting out there on the site as we talk to you to order your copy. The book's packed full of short stories. Some of them are very short. I think I counted 29, not counting the introductions, the chapter introductions. There are also a series of line drawings, sort of illustrations in the book, and some color photographs. I particularly like the one of Chachka with his toy, and the one of Harvey winning the Cherry Festival Mile in full glory, crossing the finish line. That was great to see after reading the story. The book's able to bring different qualities to different stories, as I said during the process: humor, history, human relationships, the wonder of nature, as well as the heart and the soul of a runner. And we heard Harvey getting emotional while I was talking about some bits of it. He certainly clearly put his heart and soul into it. The grouping of stories is by themes. For example, racing is one theme. So there's no chronological order. Sometimes we see Harvey as a child, sometimes we see him as a student, sometimes we see him as an older person, but it doesn't move in chronology. That's not how it's grouped. The connecting theme, I think, is one of simple authenticity. The stories are not always perfect, but they're certainly real and honest. And sometimes they are, in fact, perfect, like running out on Christmas morning and being joined by an endless series of deer.
So I guess I'll start by saying that at first I wasn't really sure about the whole short story format. The reason is because in general, I like when stories last, and I find that short stories are kind of over too quickly. But I ended up really enjoying the book. It made me realize that in the end, everyone's life is really just a bunch of short stories. I liked the cover art. There are elements that refer to the stories, but you'll actually only really understand after reading. Because, if you look at it just now online, it's not going to really make any sense.
Oh, what's this all about? And then when I read the stories and looked at the book afterwards, I thought, oh, it's perfect.
It's a perfect cover, actually. They're a good mix of emotional stories and lighthearted stories. So I think the mix is right. And bear with me for this one. This is one bullet point, but it's going to be a little bit long for me to get this idea out. One of the quotes that stood out to me was in the explanation of why Harvey decided not to write the stories of his children and who they have become. And the quote is, "For me to write a story of who I think they are just wouldn't be right." And this quote made me think of how people often have to move away from their support system in order to change substantially. For example, they always say that an alcoholic who wants to stop drinking needs to stop seeing his drinking buddies because they'll usually not support this new goal because the person no longer responds to their vision of the person. Or sometimes it's just because, maybe they've seen that person fail in achieving their goal so many times that they don't even really believe that they can achieve it. And so I think Harvey, what he was trying to do is not paint a picture of his children in order to give them freedom to be and develop into the people that they want to be. And I just found that was just I don't know why that stood out to me so much, but it was kind of a powerful insight.
I think it touches you personally in your background.
It does, because I've definitely changed my environment to, represent more like what I wanted to become. So I can kind of relate to that. And I think it's great when people can, support you in things that are different from let's say like the person you are. And I think that's a little bit what friendship does is, you find a friend, and if you have a good friend, then that friend will stay your friend despite all the changes in your life. And I find running friends are a lot like that, because we're all very different in terms of our lives, but we're joined together because of running, which is the sport that we all share and love. Anyway, that was a really long bullet point.
So you might not know how you did it, Harvey, but you've reached out through your book and touched Liz in a profound way.
Yes, definitely.
You know what? As an author, I listened to both what you said, and I am so grateful because both of you got it. You got the book. What else could I ask for? You really did get it. Like what you said, Liz. Like I know exactly where you went. Like and Alan, and which stories resonated with you. Like, wow, you guys really got it. I feel really grateful.
That's great. Also, I wanted to just say that I enjoyed learning pieces of Canadian running history, and how runners would discover races by word of mouth, and you would have these high level races like the Cherry Blossom Festival Mile, and you would have all of these great runners there. But this was before, it was posted online and you had social media. So
don't Google it.
It's amazing. I find that's amazing. So also, I'll just say that there is an audiobook. So if you, want to feel like one of Harvey's clients getting a story while you're on the treadmill, you can get the audiobook format.
Absolutely.
With that, it probably just remains for us to say a big thank you, Harvey, for spending time with us and sharing in a personal way some of your stories and background.
It has been such a pleasure. I've had so much fun talking to you both. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Running Book Reviews. A big thank you to Harvey for providing reviewed copies, signed review copies no less, and spending time with us today. If you'd like to leave us feedback about our podcast, or you want to suggest a book that you'd like us to review in a future episode, please leave us comments on our social media. We are Running Book Reviews on Facebook and Instagram, and on Twitter we are reviews_running. Please follow us and to find out about new episodes when they're released, or you can just subscribe to the podcast on your favorite streaming platform. If you've been listening for a while and you're wondering how you can help us out, there are a few ways. If you enjoy the podcast, spread the word. Tell your friends about us, share a link, get other people interested in the podcast so we can grow our listenership. Or you can leave us a review on Apple Podcast if this is how you listen to the podcast, or you can rate us on Spotify out of 5 stars. Also, you might have noticed if you're in one of our circle of friends on Buy Me a Coffee, they were starting to put out little pieces of stories and pictures and outtakes on our Buy Me a Coffee site. You can just go there, just look for Running Book Reviews on the Buy Me a Coffee website. And if you feel so moved, you can buy us a coffee as well while you're there. That's all for today from Running Book Reviews.
Bye for now.